It was the most humiliating moment of her career. Standing before the senior executives, every word felt like a jab. Just as hope seemed lost, the door opened. The CEO, Henry Caldwell, walked in. The room's tension shifted, and her fate was about to change in an unexpected way. But before we dive into the full story, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories. Now let's dive into it. Sarah Jenkins had always prided herself on her work ethic. Working as a receptionist at one of the busiest airlines wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it allowed her to take care of her family. Each morning, she arrived early, greeted the staff with a smile, and ensured the office ran smoothly. Most days, she sat behind her desk, answering calls, booking appointments, and sorting out emails. It wasn't a challenging job, but it suited her. That particular morning started like any other. Sarah had arrived at her desk, put on a pot of coffee, and started working her way through her tasks. But when she received an email from David, one of the senior executives, asking her to come to the boardroom, she felt a sudden chill in her chest. It wasn't like her to be called to such an important meeting. Her job wasn't glamorous enough for her to be part of boardroom discussions, and she had never been asked to attend one before. With a knot forming in her stomach, Sarah did her best to calm her nerves. She knew she had been doing her job well. There had been no mistakes, no complaints. Still, the anxiety lingered as she stood up from her desk and walked to the boardroom. She had no idea what awaited her. Sarah hesitated at the door to the boardroom, her hand on the knob. She had worked at the company for years, but the thought of facing the senior executives made her stomach flip. She took a deep breath, turned the handle, and walked in. The room fell silent as she stepped through the door. The senior executives sat around the long, polished table, each one with their own serious expression. She felt a sudden wave of unease as they all turned to look at her. Sarah tried to keep her composure, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that she didn't belong in this room. "Ms. Jenkins," David, one of the executives, said with a condescending tone, "we've asked you here to address a problem. It seems you've made a mistake on the flight schedule last week, which caused some confusion among the staff." Sarah's heart sank. She couldn't recall any major mistake, but she knew better than to argue with him. She had always done her best, and the small details were always double-checked. Still, she knew it was no use trying to explain. David continued, raising his voice slightly. "This sort of mistake is unacceptable. As a receptionist, you're supposed to be the face of the company, yet you're messing up something as simple as a flight schedule. Do you even take your job seriously?" The room was silent, and Sarah felt herself shrink under the weight of his words. The other executives nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with disapproval. She could feel the sting of humiliation as she stood there, trying not to break down. Her pulse raced, but she remained silent. The criticism was relentless. David and the others continued to pick apart every small detail of Sarah's work. Her eyes burned with the effort to hold back tears. It seemed as though no matter what she did, it would never be enough. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet all they saw were her flaws. Another executive, Karen, chimed in. "You should have known better, Sarah. This is basic stuff. Are you really cut out for this kind of job?" The question hung in the air, and Sarah didn't have an answer. The words dug into her like a knife. She had always been quiet, always kept her head down, and never asked for recognition. But now, in the face of this harsh judgment, it seemed as if none of her hard work mattered. She wasn't even given the chance to defend herself. Each word from the executives felt like a blow. Her face burned and her hands trembled. She wished she could leave the room and disappear. She had made mistakes in the past, sure, but nothing to deserve this kind of public humiliation. The room was suffocating and Sarah's throat felt tight. She didn't know how much more she could take, but she had no choice but to stand there, taking the brunt of their disapproval. Just as Sarah's patience was about to snap, the door to the boardroom opened. Everyone turned as a tall figure entered the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Standing at the door was none other than Henry Caldwell, the billionaire CEO of the airline. For a moment, the room was silent. The executives froze in place, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Henry rarely made appearances in the day-to-day running of the business. He was known for his elusive nature, and his presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the room. Henry looked at each of them, his expression calm yet commanding. Sarah could feel the power emanating from him as he slowly walked into the room. The executives immediately stood up, their posture straightening in his presence. They all knew Henry didn't tolerate disrespect, and it was clear they were nervous. Glanced at Sarah briefly before addressing the executives. "I'm sorry, but what's going on here?" Henry Caldwell's presence in the room was nothing short of overwhelming. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, he was a figure many people feared. But what struck Sarah was the calmness in his voice and the power he exuded without even raising it. "What's happening here?" he asked again, this time looking directly at David, who had been the most vocal in criticizing Sarah. David cleared his throat and tried to explain himself, but Henry wasn't having it. "I asked you a question," Henry said firmly. "I'd like an answer." The room went dead silent. Sarah could see the senior executives fidgeting, clearly uncomfortable. Henry's gaze didn't leave them as he continued. "If there's a problem with Sarah's work, I'd like to hear it. But I don't think public humiliation is the solution." David's face turned red, and he opened his mouth to say something, but Henry didn't give him the chance. "You've been treating her as if she's expendable." "That's not how we operate here," Henry said. He turned to Sarah. "You've been doing a good job, haven't you?" Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Henry Caldwell, the CEO, was defending her. After all the humiliation she'd endured, it felt like a dream. He was standing up for her, and the executives were left speechless. Henry's calm and unwavering confidence was enough to send shockwaves through the room. The power dynamic had completely shifted in an instant. The senior executives who had been so sure of themselves just moments ago now seemed to shrink in Henry's presence. Sarah could see the fear in their eyes. They had underestimated her, and they had underestimated the CEO. "Let me make this clear," Henry continued, his voice calm but firm. "Mistakes happen, but they do not define you. What matters is how we respond and how we treat each other." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was as if the weight of the entire world had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time that day, she felt like her worth wasn't tied to her mistakes. She had been treated with dignity and respect, something she had never expected from the senior executives. Henry's gaze softened as he turned to Sarah. "You're doing great. Keep it up," he said with a small, reassuring smile. Sarah was stunned. The words were simple, but they meant the world to her. The executives stood frozen, unable to respond. It was clear Henry wasn't going to let this slide. The silence in the room was deafening. For the first time, Sarah felt like she was in control. Henry had just publicly defended her, and that meant something. It meant everything. "Are you all finished?" Henry asked after a long pause, looking at the executives one by one. "Because if you are, I'll be leaving now." David, still embarrassed, nodded meekly. Sarah could see the defeat in his eyes. It was clear he realized how much he had overstepped. Henry turned to Sarah one last time. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, but know that I see you. You're valuable to this company." And just like that, Henry left the room, his presence lingering in the air. The executives were left in stunned silence. Sarah, on the other hand, felt a sense of relief. She wasn't just a receptionist anymore. She was someone who had been seen, heard, and respected. In the days following Henry's intervention, things at the company started to change. Sarah was no longer the invisible receptionist. People treated her differently now, more respectfully, more thoughtfully. The executives, once so critical, now went out of their way to acknowledge her work. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step forward. At first, Sarah wondered if she had imagined the whole thing. Could Henry Caldwell really have been defending her? But each time someone offered her a compliment or treated her with respect, she knew that what had happened was real. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer an afterthought. Sarah's confidence grew in the weeks that followed. She continued to do her job well, but now there was a quiet pride in her work. The humiliation of that day seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She still wasn't the most powerful person in the company, but now she walked with her head held high. The executives, on the other hand, were more subdued. They no longer treated her with the same arrogance. They seemed to understand that Henry Caldwell had made his stance clear, and their behavior would no longer be tolerated. Word of what happened in the boardroom spread through the company. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was about the message Henry Caldwell had sent. No one was too small, too insignificant to deserve respect. Everyone, no matter their role, mattered. For Sarah, the event changed everything. It wasn't about the mistake she had made. It was about being valued for who she was. She wasn't just a simple receptionist anymore. She was someone who had earned her place. And that was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her career. As the dust settled and the room slowly came to life with new opportunities, she realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the greatest transformations. From humiliation to triumph, she had learned that resilience can rewrite any story. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. See you in the next one.